Number 1, Nguyen Hai Duong, the ghost behind the villa gates. If one were to travel along National Highway 13 as it cuts through the Chon Ton district of Ben Phuoc province, particularly on days when the tropical rains lash against the earth, there is a palpable sense of melancholy that hangs over the endless rubber plantations. This region was once celebrated as the capital of the timber tycoons, a place where prosperity was measured in the square footage of sprawling villas hidden behind fortified gates. But in the early hours of July 7, 2015, the superficial tranquility of this red soil land was violently torn apart by a crime of such magnitude that, even now, the mere mention of it sends a shiver down the spine of the local populace. We are speaking of the case that stands at the very summit of this list, not merely because of the staggering body count, but because of the sheer, calculated cruelty masked by an angelic face. This is the massacre of the Lo Van Mai family, and the architect of this nightmare was a young man named Nguyen Hai Duong. In the annals of criminology, we are often conditioned to look for warning signs in the physical appearance of a killer. We expect a wild, manic gaze, a brutish demeanor, or a history written in scars and violence. But Nguyen Hai Duong shattered every single one of these stereotypes. He entered this narrative not as a monster, but as the perfect son-in-law. Born in 1991 in the Mekong Delta province of Anjong, Duong possessed the handsome, scholarly features of a matinee idol, a polite way of speaking, and a gentle smile that easily won the hearts of anyone he met. It is precisely this jarring contrast, between the saintly exterior and the demonic interior, that transformed this case into a profound psychological horror. The victims did not perish at the hands of a stranger breaking in from the dark, they died at the hands of a man they had once invited to their dinner table, a man they had treated like a son. To truly comprehend the genesis of this cold-blooded rage, we must rewind the clock to a time when the story still bore the hallmarks of a fairy tale. Nguyen Hai Duong, a provincial boy from a humble background, arrived in Ho Chi Minh City carrying the burning ambition to change his fate. Destiny, it seemed, smiled upon him when he met Lo Tian Lin, the cherished daughter of Mr. Lo Van Mai, one of the wealthiest timber magnates in Ben Phuoc. Their romance was picture-perfect. Lin loved Duong with a sincere, unmaterialistic heart, while Duong, beyond the romance, found in Lin a golden ticket into the upper echelons of society. One must try to inhabit Duong's mindset to feel the intoxicating rush of that ascent. From a young man living in a cramped rented room, struggling with the daily grind of survival, he was suddenly transported into a world of opulence. He lived in a lavish villa, drove luxury supercars, wore designer clothes, and, most importantly, basked in the admiring gaze of society. Mr. Mai and Mrs. Na, Lin's parents, initially adored Duong, welcoming him into their home, allowing him to stay in the villa, and treating him as part of the family. Duong had tasted the sweet nectar of power and wealth. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that this life belonged to him, that it was his destiny. He had constructed his entire self-esteem and identity around this relationship. However, life is not a romance novel. The Mai family were pragmatic business people. When they realized the vast disparity in background and future prospects, they gently advised their daughter against the union. They wanted Lin to find a partner who was more mon dang ho doi, of equal social standing. Lin, though deeply in love, was a filial daughter. She listened to her parents and decided to end the relationship. A breakup, for a normal person, is a sorrow that heals with time. But for Nguyen Hai Duong, it was an intolerable humiliation. That was the moment the demon within him awoke. Psychologists refer to this as a narcissistic injury. When stripped of his love, Duong felt he had been stripped of his human dignity. He did not view the breakup as a result of incompatibility, he viewed it as a conspiracy, a betrayal. He believed the Mai family had used him, toyed with his emotions, and then discarded him like a piece of trash when he no longer served a purpose. From heartbreak, his mind curdled into extreme hatred. He no longer wanted to win her back, he wanted total annihilation. His thinking slid down a pathological slope. If I cannot have this happiness, then no one is allowed to have it. His target was not just Lin, but the entire ecosystem that had created the world from which he had been exiled. The true terror of Nguyen Hai Duong lies not in a moment of hot-blooded passion, but in his chilling, meticulous calculation. He did not grab a knife and rush to her house immediately. He spent months planning his revenge, like a director scripting his own horror movie. He knew he could not control a family of 6 on his own, so he needed an accomplice. Initially, he recruited Tran Dinh Thuy. But after a failed reconnaissance mission, Thuy, overcome by fear, withdrew, though he still provided Duong with the weapons. Undeterred, Duong sought out Vu Van Tien. Tien was the perfect pawn, uneducated, impoverished, sullen, and easily manipulated. Duong used psychological leverage and promises of money to turn Tien into a puppet in his hands. He prepared every single detail: ball-bearing guns to intimidate, flick knives, tie knives, plastic zip ties to bind hands, and wide rolls of tape to gag mouths. He purchased unregistered SIM cards to communicate and evade police tracking. He calculated the timing and the travel routes to avoid security cameras on the highway. But the cruelest detail in Duong's plan was the Trojan horse. He knew the My Villa was an impregnable fortress with high walls, a moat, and a dense security system. He couldn't break in. He needed someone to open the door. The target he chose was Du Minh Vy, the 14-year-old nephew of the family. Vi adored Brother Duong, who often gave him pocket money and played video games with him. Duong texted Vy, luring him to open the gate at 2 a.m. with the promise of money and a pet fighting rooster. He turned a child's innocence and trust into the key that would unlock the gates of hell. On the fateful night of July 7, 2015, the rain poured down in torrents. The sound of heavy rain drumming on the tin roofs and the wind howling through the window cracks created a perfect curtain of sound, masking the screams that were about to echo. At exactly 2 a.m., Duong and Tien arrived on a motorbike outside the villa. The heavy iron gate creaked open. Du Minh Vy stepped out, perhaps ready to offer a smile to the familiar brother he admired. But that smile never had the chance to fade. Duong lunged. He gagged the boy and slit his throat right there in the courtyard. Vi's body crumpled onto the cold, wet tiles. No loud noise. The gate was open. The devil was inside. Stepping over the body of the child who had once called him brother, Duong and Tien entered the magnificent villa. They began the brutal process Duong had mapped out in his mind: divide and conquer. They did not rush into a frenzied slaughter. They moved from room to room, waking each person, using the stun gun and knives to terrify them, binding their hands and taping their mouths. The cruelty of Duong lay in his desire for the victims to be awake. He wanted them to be fully conscious of the approaching death. He wanted to see the ultimate fear in the eyes of those he believed had looked down on him. One by one, they were dragged from their beds. Mr. Mai, Mrs. Na, Lo Kwak On, the son, and Du Ngoc to Nu, the niece. Duong staged a robbery to mask his true motive. He forced Mrs. Na to open the safe, but when he didn't find the large sum of money he expected, it gave him further excuse to unleash his savagery. Mrs. Na, the woman who had once treated Duong like a son, knelt and begged, "Son, please don't kill me, I beg you." But standing before her was no longer the gentle son-in-law of the past. He coldly ordered Tien to strangle her, then finished the job himself. Tien, the accomplice, panicked multiple times as the blood began to flow. He whispered, "Let's go home, brother, let's stop," but each time, Duong would glare at him, his eyes burning with a maniacal resolve. "We do this to the end." He allowed no U-turns. He wanted to erase them all. After 5 lives had been extinguished, Duong entered Lo Ti-on Lin's room. The girl was sitting slumped next to the bed, trembling in absolute terror. This was the moment Duong had waited for through all those months of hatred. He faced the girl he had once sworn to love forever. In that final moment, he showed not a shred of pity or regret. He leaned close to Lin's ear, whispering bitter, venomous words, "Everything that is happening today is because of you and your family. Why did you treat me this way?" It was the accusation of a pathological narcissist. He blamed the victim for his own atrocities, rationalizing his brutal behavior as a just punishment. And then, he took Lin's life, ending their tragic romance with blood and tears. 6 lives. 3 generations. All wiped out in less than 60 minutes. The opulent villa had been transformed into a mass grave, thick with the metallic stench of death. But amidst this tableau of hell on earth, something strange happened, a detail that makes this case more haunting and tormenting than any fiction. A baby's cry rang out, piercing the deadly silence. It was baby Na, the 18-month-old daughter of Mr. Mai. She had been sleeping in her parents' room and had woken up due to the noise. Nguyen Hai Duong, the man who had just butchered 6 people without flinching, the man with a heart of stone, suddenly stopped. He walked toward the cradle. Vu Van Tien looked at him, likely thinking Duong would kill the baby to eliminate the final witness, for Duong's rule was, leave no one behind, but no. Duong picked baby Na up. He cradled the infant in his arms, rocking her, soothing her. Hush Na, be good, go back to sleep. He lulled the child back to slumber, then gently placed her back on the bed. Why? Why would a demon perform such a tender act? Perhaps, in the deep recesses of his darkened soul, baby Na was the only embodiment of innocence, the only living remnant of the happy days he once had in this house. Or perhaps, the cry of the child awakened a final, fragile flicker of humanity before it was extinguished forever. Whatever the reason, baby Na was the sole survivor, sleeping soundly beside the corpses of her parents until morning broke. The next day, as news of the massacre broke, the nation of Vietnam was shaken to its core. A sea of curious onlookers flooded into Bin Phu Quoc. And Nguyen Hai Duong performed the final act of his life. He returned to the scene. He wore black, his face a mask of devastation, weeping uncontrollably. He hugged the surviving relatives of the family, playing the role of the devoted ex-boyfriend, crushed by the loss. He even helped with the funeral arrangements, carrying the coffins, his eyes heavy with sorrow. The public looked at him and felt pity. But he had underestimated the seasoned investigators of the Vietnamese police. Major General Ho Sytn and the Special Task Force noticed the cracks in Duong's perfect performance. The crime scene was too clean, suggesting the killer knew the house intimately. The text messages on Little V's phone before he died all pointed to one person, Brother Duong, and most importantly, the intuition of the investigators. When called in for questioning, although Duong appeared calm and cooperative, small inconsistencies in his alibi, coupled with his evasive eyes when baby Na was mentioned, betrayed him. After hours of intense psychological confrontation, faced with undeniable evidence, Nguyen Hai Duong bowed his head and confessed. His confession was cold, detailed, and matched the crime scene perfectly, causing even the most hardened officers to shudder. On the day of the mobile trial in Bin Phu Quoc, thousands of people braved the scorching sun to witness the verdict. A sea of outrage, with chants demanding the death penalty, echoed through the sky. Standing in the dock, Nguyen, Number 2, Lo Van Luyen, when the devil wears a child's face. If at number 1, Nguyen Hai Duong chilled us to the bone with the cold calculation of an adult consumed by revenge, the name standing at number 2 delivers a terror that is far more primal, chaotic, and inexplicable. It is the fear of the corruption of innocence. This killer had no perfect script, no complex romantic motive, and no deep-seated vendetta against his victims. He killed simply out of a juvenile greed and an instinctual savagery that defies logic. This case etched itself into the Vietnamese psyche not only because of the sheer brutality of the act but because it created an unprecedented legal shockwave, turning a proper name into a byword for the ultimate evil, Lo Van Luyen. To begin this heartbreaking saga, we must leave the rubber plantations of the south and travel north to the small town of Pho San, in the Luc Nam district of Bac Giang province. In 2011, this was a peaceful countryside town where life moved slowly, and neighbors knew each other by name. Standing prominently in the town was a 3-story house located right on the national highway. The first floor was home to the Ngoc Bich Gold Shop. Its owners, Mr. Trin Ton Ngoc and Mrs. Din Thi Chin, were the epitome of hard-working Vietnamese people. They had built this business from nothing, saving every penny to create a legacy. The golden light shimmering from the glass cabinets of the NGOC bitch shop was not just a symbol of their family's prosperity, it was a beacon of the Vietnamese dream. They were a picture-perfect family with 2 young daughters, 8-year-old bitch, a 3rd grader, and baby Tao, a cherubic angel who had just turned 18 months old. But they could not have known that their prosperity had unwittingly turned them into prey in the eyes of a starving young wolf. Lu Van Nguyen, born in 1993, lived just a few kilometers away from the gold shop. At 17 years old, an age that in Vietnamese culture represents strength and potential, a time when one should be in school dreaming of the future, Nguyen was instead a ghost drifting on the margins of society. A high school dropout with no job and no direction, Nguyen drowned his time in online games and aimless wandering. He was drowning in debt, having pawned his motorbike to fund his lifestyle. The pressure to redeem his bike, combined with the desperation of poverty and the warped logic of an uneducated mind, pushed him toward an insane decision: rob the gold shop. In his immature mind, the NGOC bitch shop was not the home of a family, it was simply a treasure chest waiting to be cracked open. The night of August 23 leading into the dawn of August 24, 2011, was a fateful night that the people of Pho San would never forget. The rain poured down in torrents, thunder scarred the sky, and in a twist of cruel misfortune, the entire neighborhood suffered a power outage. The darkness and the deafening rain became the most effective accomplices for the intruder. Lu Van Nguyen, armed with a switchblade and a butcher knife, approached the house. He didn't smash the door down. Like a feral cat, he climbed a tree in front of the house, swung himself onto the 3rd-floor balcony, pried open a door, and slipped inside. What makes this case truly terrifying is not just the act of killing, but Nguyen's grotesque patience. After successfully infiltrating the house, he didn't strike immediately. He knew the family might still be awake or sleeping lightly. So, he hid in the shadows of that house for hours. Imagine the horror of that reality, while Mr. Ngoc, his wife, and their 2 children slept peacefully, just a few meters away, behind a cabinet door or under a table, a pair of cold eyes was watching their every breath, waiting for the perfect moment to extinguish their lives. The silent presence of evil within the safest space imaginable, one's own home, is the stuff of our worst nightmares. Around 5:30 a.m., as the weak dawn light began to struggle through the rain, Mr. Ngoc woke up. As was the habit of a diligent businessman, he prepared to go downstairs to open the shop for the day. But the moment he stepped out of the bedroom on the 3rd floor, he came face to face with the Reaper. Lu Van Nguyen lunged from the shadows. A life-and-death struggle ensued on the narrow staircase. Mr. Ngoc, despite being taken by surprise and suffering critical stab wounds, fought back with the ferocious strength of a father protecting his brood. He grappled, he shouted, and at one point, he even managed to wrestle the knife away from Nguyen. The commotion and his screams woke his wife, Mrs. Chin. Running from the bedroom, she witnessed her husband battling the intruder in a pool of blood. She didn't run. She threw herself into the fight, trying to save her husband. But by this point, Nguyen had entered a feeding frenzy. He was no longer a 17-year-old boy, he had transformed into a cornered beast. He swung his knife wildly, brutally, and decisively. Exhausted and losing too much blood, the couple collapsed on the landing of the stairs. Their blood mingled, flowing down the steps, marking the end of the lives of 2 decent, hard-working people. If the crime had stopped there, Lu Van Nguyen might have been remembered simply as a brutal robber. But what happened in the next 10 minutes is what turned him into a demon in the eyes of the nation. After killing the 2 adults, Nguyen heard crying. He walked into the bedroom. Baby Trinh Phuong Tao, 18 months old, was standing in her crib, screaming in terror at the strange noises and the metallic scent of blood. A child who could not yet speak clearly, who could barely walk, completely harmless and incapable of identifying him. But Nguyen didn't care. In a manic desire to eliminate all witnesses, he slit the throat of the infant. This act crossed every line of human morality. It revealed a complete void in his soul, a terrifying indifference to the sanctity of life. And then, his eyes found 8-year-old Trinh T. Bitch. The little girl was cowering in the corner of the room, paralyzed with absolute terror after witnessing the carnage. Nguyen lunged, swinging the butcher knife down. In a fierce instinct for survival, the third grader raised her tiny hand to block the blow. The sharp blade severed her hand completely. Nguyen delivered more slashes to her body, and then, presuming she was dead, or perhaps thinking a child with such wounds couldn't possibly survive, he left her there to bleed out while he went downstairs to sack the gold cabinets. The miracle, and the most painful part of this story, is the resilience of little bitch. She didn't die. She lay still, feigning death next to the pool of blood, suppressing the excruciating pain from her severed hand, daring not to make a sound for fear the killer would return. She lay there, listening to his footsteps as he ransacked the floor below, listening to the sound of him leaving, and then lying in the deathly silence that engulfed the house. It was a long time later, only when she was sure the monster was gone, that the 8-year-old girl dragged herself up, using her last ounce of strength to find the phone and call her relatives. The image of bitch, her body covered in wounds, her hand no longer whole, stands as the sole living witness testifying to this crime that shook heaven and earth. After looting a large amount of gold, Lo Van Nguyen escaped the scene. He showed no panic, no fear. He went home, treated his own wounds, sustained during the struggle with Mr. Ngoc, and quickly fled to Lang Son province, seeking refuge at his uncle's house. During his days on the run, his demeanor was impossibly calm. He went out to eat pho, he went about his day, he even planned to cross the border into China. He showed not a flicker of trauma, guilt, or remorse for wiping out an entire family, including a baby who hadn't even been weaned. This coldness forced criminal psychologists to ask, was he a born psychopath, or had a lack of education and the desensitization of violent video games created this monster? When Lo Van Nguyen was finally captured, the nation of Vietnam exploded in a fury never seen before. From sidewalk tea stalls to online forums, everyone spoke of Nguyen with absolute loathing. Thousands of people surrounded the police station and the courthouse. The sounds of booing and cursing filled the sky. They wanted to see the face of the killer, and more than that, they wanted to see justice served with the ultimate sentence, a life for a life. To the vast majority of the public, killing 3 people, including children, was an unforgivable sin, regardless of the reason. However, a legal shock, a cruel paradox, occurred, making this case a lingering wound for years to come. At the moment he swung the knife, Lo Van Nguyen was exactly 17 years, 10 months, and 6 days old. He was exactly 54 days short of his 18th birthday. Just 54 days, a period of less than 2 months, became his gold card of immunity according to the Vietnamese Penal Code and international conventions on the rights of the child to which Vietnam is a signatory. A minor who commits a crime, no matter how heinous, can only receive a maximum sentence of 18 years in prison. On the day of the verdict, the atmosphere in the courtroom was as tense as a violin string about to snap. When the judge read the sentence, 18 years in prison, the entire room erupted in outrage. The victim's family collapsed, wailing in agony. The crowd outside threatened to storm the building. They felt justice had been mocked. How could a monster who slaughtered a family and mutilated a child be allowed to return to society when he was still in his 30s? Meanwhile, little bitch would have to live the rest of her life with a disability and a soul scarred beyond repair. The Lo Van Nguyen law became a phrase dripping with sarcasm and pain in legal debates for years afterward. The case posed a massive question to society: is the law too humane towards juvenile evil? Does the age of criminal responsibility need to change when criminals are getting younger and more savage? Lo Van Nguyen stands at number 2 on this list not just because of the body count, but because he is the symbol of the collapse of our belief in innocence. Before this case, people believed that children and teenagers might be impulsive or reckless, but not capable of such calculated inhumanity. Nguyen proved them wrong. He demonstrated that demons do not need to wait for adulthood to reveal themselves. He is a bloody warning about the failure of family education, the toxic impact of violent entertainment, and the loopholes in the net of the law. Today, Lo Van Nguyen is serving his time in prison. There are reports that he has repented, that he makes lanterns and reads Buddhist scriptures. But is that repentance genuine, or is it merely a survival tactic for a life behind bars while waiting for his release date? No one knows for sure. We only know that somewhere, the little girl bitch has grown into a young woman. She is alive, she has risen from the tragedy with immense strength, but her missing hand will forever be the evidence of that stormy night in 2011. The case of Lưu Van Leyen will forever remain a dark stain in the history of Vietnamese justice, a reminder that sometimes, the boundary between a child and a monster is as thin as a birth certificate. Number 3, Nguyen Duc Nia, the assassin with the scholar's face. Leaving behind the red soil of Binh Phuoc with its tangled webs of romance and revenge, and departing from the rural town of Pho San where the primal savagery of a teenager shattered a community, we now return to the beating heart of the nation, Hanoi. At number 3, we do not face a tattooed gangster or an uneducated thug from the fringes of society. We face a criminal archetype that is infinitely more terrifying, a figure that makes every urban dweller flinch when stepping into an elevator with a stranger. It is the presence of evil hiding behind a mask of intellect, politeness, and charm. This case shook the public not merely because of the loss of life, but because of the method of disposal, a coldness so inhuman that it turned a high-end apartment complex into the set of a real-life horror film. This is the dossier of the headless corpse at the G4 building, and the monster behind it bears the name Nguyen Duc Nia. To truly grasp the seismic impact of this case, we must recall the atmosphere of Hanoi in 2010. The Trung Hoa, Nan Chin urban area was then the symbol of a rising Vietnam, a place where skyscrapers were sprouting up to represent a modern, civilized, and secure lifestyle for the intellectual middle class. Nguyen Duc Nia, born in 1984 in Hai Phong, was a perfect piece of that picture. He was a student at a prestigious university, bespectacled, soft-spoken, well-groomed, and possessed a scholarly demeanor. To his friends and those around him, Nia was a good boy, an ideal boyfriend. No one, absolutely no one, could have suspected that behind those thick-rimmed glasses lay the cold, reptilian eyes of a predator, and beneath that polite exterior was a soul corroded by selfishness and ultimate cruelty. The story begins during the national holidays of April 30th and May 1st, 2010. While the country was celebrating in a festive mood, a tragedy was quietly unfolding inside apartment 1101, on the 11th floor of the G4 building. This apartment belonged to Hong T. Yen, Nia's current girlfriend. Yen had returned to her hometown for the holiday and, trusting her boyfriend implicitly, gave him the keys to look after the place. For Nia, this was not an opportunity to house-sit, it was an opportunity to indulge in his darkest calculations. He turned his lover's sanctuary into a death trap. On May 4, 2010, Nia contacted his ex-girlfriend, Nguyen Phuong Linh. Linh was a beautiful, well-behaved girl from Hanoi. Although they had broken up, she maintained a friendship with Nia and held a certain level of trust in him. When she received the invitation to come to the apartment to talk, Linh did not harbor a shred of suspicion. She rode her expensive Honda SCR scooter to the meeting point, unaware that she was embarking on a one-way journey. At the G4 apartment, old memories resurfaced, and what happened next was a betrayal of intimacy. But the tragedy lies not in Nia's infidelity to his current girlfriend, but in the horror that followed the silence. As night fell, the atmosphere in apartment 1101 grew heavy. Linh was standing in front of the mirror, combing her hair, perhaps preparing to leave or fixing her appearance. She was completely relaxed, completely defenseless. It was in that precise moment that Nguyen Duc Nia revealed his true form. He picked up a fruit knife, about 20 centimeters long, and silently approached her from behind. Without a word of warning, without a heated argument, he plunged the knife into the girl's back. The fatal stab wound caused Linh to collapse instantly, blood pouring onto the floor. She died without ever understanding why the man she once loved had delivered such a brutal end. If the story stopped here, it would be a tragic but typical crime of passion. But what placed Nguyen Duc Nia on the list of Vietnam's most terrifying killers, was his behavior in the hours that followed. A normal person, after committing manslaughter or murder in the heat of the moment, would panic, flee, or surrender. But not Nia. His calmness forces criminal psychologists to shudder. He sat down, looked at the body of his ex-lover, and began to calculate. He didn't just want to kill her, he wanted to erase her existence. He wanted to turn her into a Jane Doe, a nameless corpse, to cover his tracks. Nia dragged Lynn's body into the bathroom. There, in the cramped and cold space, he performed a barbaric act without precedent in Vietnamese crimes of passion. He used the knife to sever the victim's head. But he didn't stop there. With a twisted knowledge gleaned from crime fiction or a dark intellect, he knew that fingerprints were the key to identification. So, with surgical precision, he proceeded to slice off the 10 fingertips of the dead girl. Try to imagine the sheer cold-bloodedness required for a human being to meticulously dismantle the body of someone they once held in their arms. This was not the act of a man in a blind rage, it was the act of an unfeeling monster who viewed a human being as nothing more than biological waste to be processed. After completing this macabre task, Nia began the disposal process. He wrapped the torso of the body in a duvet and bedsheets. Waiting until the dead of night, when the G4 building had fallen into slumber, he hoisted the body onto his shoulder and took the stairs up to the roof, the 13th floor. There, he hid the body in the technical garbage room, a place rarely visited, filled with dust and refuse. He left her there, in the dark, in absolute solitude. But the head and the fingertips remained. Nia placed them in a plastic bag. He took Lynn's Honda SCR scooter, her phone, and her laptop. The next morning, he rode the scooter all the way to Quang Ninh province. On the way, he casually stopped to sell the victim's phone to get cash for spending. When he reached the Cam River Bridge in Dong Tru Town, Quang Ninh, he stopped and threw the plastic bag containing the head and fingertips into the murky water. He believed the river would wash everything away, burying his crime forever beneath the deep mud. Returning to Hanoi, Nia continued his charade with a cunning that bordered on sociopathy. He noticed blood spatters on the wall of the apartment. Instead of panicking, he went out, bought paint, and meticulously repainted just that section of the wall to hide the stain. When Hong Ti-yen returned from her holiday, Nia was still there, smiling, chatting, and living as if nothing had happened. He ate, slept, and made love in the very room that, just days before, had reeked of blood. Even when Yen questioned the fresh patch of paint, he casually lied, saying he had made a mess and painted it over to look nice. He lived with that horrific secret for days without showing a single crack in his mask. The crime of Nguyen Duc Nia might have remained buried longer if not for the voice of the dead. On May 17, 2010, nearly 2 weeks after the murder, residents living on the upper floors of the G4 building began to smell an unbearable, foul odor. The scent of death seeped through the cracks of the doors, haunting the lives of hundreds of people. The building management investigated and traced the source to the technical garbage room on the roof. When the door was opened, a horrific scene assaulted their senses, a human body in a state of advanced decomposition, missing its head and fingertips. The news of the headless corpse instantly sent shockwaves through the capital. The police launched a manhunt under immense pressure. From the fragile clues at the scene, particularly the fresh paint on the wall of apartment 1101 and the testimony of Hong Ti-yen, the portrait of the killer began to emerge. Nguyen Duc Nia had by then fled to Tai Nguyen province, hiding in the house of a relative. But the net of justice was tight, and he was captured shortly after. At the police station, faced with undeniable evidence, the assassin with glasses had to bow his head and confess. However, capturing the killer was not the end of the tragedy. The journey to find the remaining parts of Nguyen Phuong Linh's body was the most painful chapter, one that drew tears from millions of Vietnamese people. Based on Nia's confession, dozens of police officers and professional divers had to submerge themselves in the Cam River in Quang Ninh for days, groping through the mud to find that fateful plastic bag. The river was vast, the currents were strong, and hope was as fragile as finding a needle in a haystack. The most haunting image of those search days was Mr. Nguyen Van Ba, the victim's father. The white-haired man, his face etched with the agony of losing his child, stood on the riverbank, setting up an altar and burning incense, praying to heaven and earth to help him find his daughter. He did not pray for her to come back to life, he only prayed to find her head so she could be whole, so she could rest in peace. The choked sobs of the old father amidst the desolate riverbank moved even the hardest hearts. And as if by a miracle, or perhaps the spiritual longing of the young girl to return home, the dive team finally found the missing body parts, stuck in a bush underwater not far from where Nia had thrown them. The trial of Nguyen Duc Nia was one of the most publicized events in the history of the Vietnamese judiciary. Thousands of people flocked to the Hanoi People's Court, jostling just to catch a glimpse of the cold-blooded killer. Standing in the dock, Nia maintained his scholarly appearance, wearing his glasses, calmly answering every question from the judge with articulate precision. He admitted to killing for robbery, to pawn the scooter and laptop to pay off gambling debts, and admitted to his base jealousy. But what outraged the public most was his cold attitude. He showed none of the desperate, tearful remorse one might expect. He seemed to accept that he was merely a loser in the game of life rather than a sinner who had stolen a future. In his final words, Nia said, "I know my crime is unforgivable. Even if I die 1,000 times, it would not be enough, but for the victim's family and society, that apology came too late." The death penalty was the only inevitable conclusion for Nguyen Duc Nia. In 2014, he paid the price with his life. The case of Nguyen Duc Nia stands at number 3 on this list because it represents a very modern fear, the fear of evil wearing a mask. He was not a product of poverty or illiteracy. He was the product of a pragmatic, selfish lifestyle, where human value was placed below trivial material desires, a life taken for a mere scooter. He proved that intellect does not equate to conscience. The glasses and the charming exterior were merely a perfect camouflage, allowing the monster inside him to easily approach and slaughter his prey. The case closed more than a decade ago, but every time the G4 building or the phrase, "the headless corpse killer," is mentioned, the people of Hanoi still feel a cold draft run down their spines, reminder that sometimes, the most dangerous person is the one with the gentlest smile. Number 4, The Mystery of House Number 90 and the Whispering Concrete Blocks. If the previous 3 cases tapped into our fears of human cruelty within social relationships, love, greed, and robbery, then this 4th entry drags us into a territory that is altogether alien. It is a landscape of warped spirituality and fanaticism, a place where the boundary between reality and hallucination is violently erased. This is the most bizarre and macabre case in the history of the modern Vietnamese judiciary, a story that bears the chilling hallmarks of a cult horror film. This is the case of The Corpse in Concrete. Leaving behind the clamor of the metropolis, we find ourselves in the Bao Bang district of Binh Duong province. In May of 2019, an event occurred in Hamlet 5, Hung Hoa commune, that shocked not only the locals but the entire nation. The story began not with a gunshot or a pool of blood, but with a haunting, accidental discovery by a man who had just purchased an abandoned single-story house. House number 90 sat hidden behind rows of rubber trees, exuding a quiet, cold desolate aura, having been uninhabited for months. The new owner, while cleaning the property to prepare for moving in, discovered a strange object sitting conspicuously in the middle of the master bedroom. It was a cylindrical concrete block, resembling a water tank, but cast solid, heavy, and bizarre. What was unsettling was that this block was not part of the house's structure. It looked like an alien object, a massive stone monolith that someone had intentionally left behind. Curious and wanting to clear the space, the owner hired laborers to drill into and break apart the concrete block. As the drill bit pierced the hard shell of cement, a pungent, unbearable stench exploded into the room, sending the workers running for fresh air, retching. Instinct told them something was terribly wrong, yet they continued to shatter the outer layer. And then, a horrific scene was revealed. Inside that cold concrete tomb lay not bricks or rubble, but a human body. A man had been stuffed into a plastic barrel, packed with dried tea leaves, wrapped tightly in tape, and then encased in concrete. But the horror did not end there. When the police arrived and conducted a thorough search, they discovered a second, smaller cylindrical concrete block lying out in the garden. Inside that one lay yet another male body. 2 corpses. 2 mobile concrete tombs. No blood at the scene. The house was suspiciously clean. The corpse in concrete case officially opened, unearthing a chain of secrets about a bizarre spiritual sect led by a group of intellectual women. The primary suspect was quickly identified as Pham Thi Ha, 31 years old. She was not an uneducated drifter, she was a woman of high intellect, a former study-abroad student, fluent in foreign languages, and the owner of a popular coffee shop in Ho Chi Minh City. But Ha was no ordinary woman. She was the leader of a self-styled cultivation group, a sect that believed in warped doctrines she had cobbled together herself. Ha believed that humans could reach a supernatural state, achieve rejuvenation, or cure all diseases if they practiced correctly. Her chosen method was tin kok, a form of extreme fasting, abstaining completely from food and water for days to purify the body. Ha's group consisted of 4 women, including Ha's own mother, and 2 men, the victims, Tran Duc Lin and Tran Tri Ton. They lived a nomadic life, moving constantly from Nha Trang to Dong Nai, Vung Tau, and finally Bin Duong, seeking secluded places to practice and evade the prying eyes of society and their families. The tragedy began when they rented a villa in the Ho Tram tourist area, Ba Ria, Vung Tau, to undertake the most grueling phase of tin kok, 14 days without food or water. The first victim, Tran Duc Lin, physically weak and unable to withstand this torture, secretly ate and tried to escape. To Pham Thi Ha, this act was not a survival instinct, it was betrayal, a sign that he had been invaded by demons. When Lin attempted to jump from a window to escape and was injured, instead of taking him to a hospital, the group carried him back into the room and forced him to continue the cultivation until he collapsed from exhaustion and died. What is truly spine-chilling is how they handled the death of their comrade. They did not bury him, they did not call the police. They turned the air conditioning to the lowest setting, 16 degrees Celsius, to preserve Lin's body in the room for days, while the remaining members continued to meditate right next to the corpse. Only when the scent of death became overpowering did they decide to move the body to the house in Bao Bang, Bin Duong. There, Ha directed the purchase of a plastic barrel, cement, sand, and stone. They placed Lin's body inside the barrel and poured concrete over it to seal in the evil spirits that was the first concrete block. But the peak of insanity and cruelty arrived with the second victim, Tran Tri Ton. Ton was a young, healthy man. During their cultivation in Bin Duong, Ton began to exhibit behaviors that Ha deemed improper, such as secretly eating, masturbating, and harboring sexual intentions toward the female members. Instead of recognizing these as normal physiological human needs, Ha concluded that Ton had been possessed by demons, and needed to be destroyed to protect the purity of the group. A macabre execution plan was drawn up by these seemingly gentle women. Ha and the female members secretly spiked Ton's water with sleeping pills. When Ton fell into a stupor, they used a noose to strangle him and electrocuted him until he died. After killing Ton, the fear of the smell of death returned. Ha, with the mindset of a fanatic armed with scientific knowledge, employed the old method but refined it. She bought a large plastic container, stuffed Ton's body inside, packed it with dozens of kilograms of dried tea leaves and glue to absorb the odor, and then mixed mortar and concrete to fill the container to the brim. Ha turned her cultivation partner into a solid stone statue right in the middle of the bedroom. The detail that sends the coldest shiver down one's spine is not the act of killing, but the life of this murderous group afterward. For months, Ha, her mother, and the 2 other women continued to live, eat, sleep, and practice in that small house, right next to the 2 concrete blocks containing the rotting bodies. They still burned incense, still prayed, still believed they were doing the right thing to save the souls of the victims. This calmness, bordering on apathy, reveals the terrifying extent of cult indoctrination. It can transform intellectuals and gentle mothers into cold-blooded killers who view human life as lighter than a feather and death as a form of liberation. When the bodies were discovered, Ha's group quickly packed their bags and fled to a hotel in a bustling residential area of Bin Duong. When police surrounded them, they barricaded themselves in their car, locking the doors, acting as calm as innocents. At the police station, Pham Thi Ha showed absolutely no remorse. She continued to preach about her cultivation philosophies, insisting that killing Ton was an act of exorcism. The corpse in concrete case stands at number 4 because it strikes at a deep spiritual fear. It is a stark warning about the dangers of superstition and the unorthodox cult silently spreading through modern society. It shows that when reason is clouded by blind faith, humans are capable of deeds that would make even demons bow their heads in defeat. The concrete blocks in Bao Bang may have been destroyed, but their haunting weight still presses on the Vietnamese psyche, a testament to the fact that sometimes, the darkest place on earth is not hell, but the mind of a fanatic. Number 5, Tran Not Due, When Freedom Becomes a Nightmare. If the corpse in concrete case tapped into our fear of the supernatural and the terrifying power of brainwashing, the 5th entry on our list brings us crashing back to a pain that is all too real, all too human, yet no less devastating. It is the tragedy of a toxic relationship, a dark corner of the human experience where love mutates into imprisonment, and the desperate yearning for freedom transforms a gentle student into a cold-blooded killer. This is a story where the instrument of liberation was not a key, but a chainsaw. We leave behind the remote provinces to return to the bustling chaos of Saigon, weaving our way into the labyrinthine alleys of the Go Vap district. In May 2014, in a modest boarding house on Quang Trung Street, a place teeming with students and working-class laborers, a horrific truth was unearthed, stripping away the veneer of normalcy to reveal the darkest recesses of the human psyche. This case stands at number 5 not merely because of the savage method of dismemberment, but because it is a heartbreaking saga of entrapment. The perpetrator was not a hardened criminal with a rap sheet, but a university student with a bright, scholarly face, a young man who chose to become a monster simply to find a way out. This is the dossier of Tran Not Due. To truly understand this tragedy, we cannot simply look at the blood-soaked crime scene, we must examine the suffocating relationship that spanned years between the killer, Tran Not Due, born in 1994, and the victim, Van Antoine, born in 1984. Both hailed from the quiet province of Tien Giang, and their entanglement began when Due was just a high school student and Tuan was already a grown man. It was a same-sex relationship, but it was far from a romance of equals. According to Due's testimony and the accounts of those who knew them, it was a dynamic defined by extreme possession and manipulation. Tuan loved Due, but it was a love that came with a stranglehold. Due testified that he was frequently threatened, beaten, and forced into sexual acts against his will. When Due moved to Saigon to attend university, hoping for a fresh start, Tuan followed him, moving into the same cramped boarding room in Go Vap to maintain his control. For a young man in the prime of his life, yearning for a future of open possibilities, life with Tuan felt like a prison without bars. Due wanted to break up, wanted to escape, but Tuan held a terrifying leverage. He threatened to release intimate photos of the two of them to the public and to harm Due's family. Fear and resentment accumulated day by day, month by month, turning Due into a powder keg waiting for a spark. And when a human being is backed into a corner with no exit, they often resort to the most desperate, destructive measures. Due decided that only death could separate them. The terrifying aspect of Tran Not Due lies in his method. He did not choose a quick, impulsive act of violence in a fit of rage. He chose a slow death, a murder calculated with a coldness that defies belief. Due went online, researching poisons. He tried to buy potassium cyanide, a lethal, fast-acting toxin, but failing to acquire it, he settled on strychnine and other toxic substances. Due's plan unfolded like a slow-motion psychological thriller. Throughout May 2014, every time he cooked instant noodles or poured a glass of water for Tuan, he secretly laced it with poison. He sat there, in that small room, watching his roommate, his lover, eat spoonful after spoonful of death. He watched Tuan vomit, watched him writhe in pain, watched his health deteriorate day by day. Imagine the sheer detachment required for a human being to calmly witness the life of another fading away right before their eyes, meal after meal, without a shred of mercy. It was the cruelty of a soul whose humanity had been paralyzed by hatred. On the night of May 19, 2014, Tuan once again fell ill, vomiting violently after consuming the poison Dewey had administered. But this time, Dewey decided to end it all. He gave Tuan 2 large capsules filled with a potent dose of the toxin he had prepared. Tuan swallowed them and slipped into unconsciousness. By 11 p.m., Dewey checked and found that Tuan had stopped breathing. He did not panic. He calmly cleaned the scene, took the victim's phone, and messaged Tuan's family, posing as Tuan, saying he was going away for work to throw off any search. Then, he lay down and slept in that rental room, right next to the corpse of the man who had haunted his life for years. But the most macabre chapter of this story, the part that places it among the most gruesome crimes in history, began the next morning. Dewey realized he could not carry a full-grown man's body out of a crowded boarding house without being seen. In the mind of that university student, a mad idea took root: disposal by fragmentation. Dewey went out and bought an electric chainsaw, rolls of tape, large plastic bags, and air freshener. Inside the cramped bathroom of the boarding house, amidst the ambient noise of the busy neighborhood, Dewey began the work of a butcher. The buzzing of the chainsaw cut through the air, but it was drowned out by the sounds of traffic and music from neighboring rooms. Blood flowed, the metallic scent of death filled the air, but Dewey continued his savage task with robotic efficiency. He severed the victim's body parts, wrapping each piece carefully in plastic bags, binding them tight with tape to prevent fluids and odors from leaking. What outraged the public even further was that Dewey did not act alone in the disposal. He called his new girlfriend, Dang Jia Lin, born in 1992, to the room. Lin, upon arriving, knew that Dewey had just committed murder and was in the process of dismembering the body. Yet, blinded by a toxic love of her own, she did not try to stop him or call the police. Instead, she stayed. She helped him clean up the bloodstains, sprayed perfume to mask the stench of decomposition, and accompanied him on a journey to scatter the remains. The disposal run of Tran Not Dewey and Dang Jia Lin was like a road trip from hell. They loaded the body parts onto a motorbike and traveled hundreds of kilometers across southern Vietnam. They took the torso to the Ta Pua Pass in Binh Thuan province and hurled it into a deep ravine. They took the limbs to the Mai Loi ferry in Tien Giang province and threw them into the river. As for the victim's head, Dewey and Lin rode all the way to the Bao Loc Pass in Lam Dong province to bury it in a roadside bush. They scattered the pieces of their crime across 3 different provinces, believing that geographical separation would make it impossible for the police to piece together the truth. After completing this horrific task, Dewey and Lin returned to their normal lives, acting as if their hands were not stained with blood. However, no matter how carefully a crime is covered up, the scent of death cannot be hidden forever. A few days later, residents living in the boarding house in Go Vap began to smell an unbearable, putrid odor emanating from Dewey's room. The landlord, suspecting something mundane like a dead rat or animal, broke the door down to check. What greeted them was a scene that would likely haunt them for the rest of their lives. Although the body was gone, the dried bloodstains, the lingering stench of death that had soaked into the walls, and small fragments of human remains left in the bathroom drain told the whole story. The police launched an immediate investigation. Using professional tracking measures, less than 24 hours after the discovery, Tran Not Dewey and Dang Jia Lin were arrested. At the police station, Dewey confessed to everything with a calmness that was unnerving. He didn't cry, he didn't tremble. He recounted the process of poisoning and dismembering with the clarity of a student reciting a practical exam. When asked about his motive, Dewey simply said he wanted freedom. He wanted to escape Tuan's grip so he could openly love Lin and live his own life. The case of Tran Not Dewey leaves a bitter aftertaste. The public was simultaneously repulsed by the brutality of his actions and struck by a pang of pity for his desperate circumstances. But the law is absolute. No one has the right to take another's life, let alone in a manner reminiscent of medieval torture, to resolve personal conflicts. In 2015, the People's Court of Ho Chi Minh City sentenced Tran Not Dewey to death for murder and robbery. Dang Jia Lin received a 2-year prison sentence for harboring a criminal and consuming property obtained through crime. Tran Not Due stands at number 5 on this list because his case is the clearest proof that when a person is trapped in a toxic relationship for too long, the line between victim and monster can be erased. Due transformed from a victim of abuse into a beast far more savage than the man who tormented him. The phantom sound of a chainsaw buzzing in a cramped room in Go Vap remains a haunting echo, reminding us of the terrible price of silence and the wrong paths taken in the name of love. Freedom, if purchased with blood and crime, is forever a prison of the soul. Number 6, The Poisoned Bubble Tea and the Forbidden Affair. Leaving behind the visceral horror of dismembered bodies and corpses encased in concrete, we arrive at the 6th case, a crime that, at first glance, appears less bloody, but whose cold-blooded cruelty is second to none. If the previous cases employed knives, hammers, or chainsaws, here, the weapon of choice was something far sweeter, something ubiquitous in youth culture, a cup of bubble tea. But hidden beneath that sugary exterior was a plot calculated with maniacal jealousy, turning a harmless beverage into a weapon of mass destruction. This case shocked the province of Tai Bin and the entire nation in late 2019, exposing a tragedy of blind love, familial betrayal, and the deadly ease of acquiring chemical poisons online. This is the dossier of the poisoned bubble tea case, and the killer wears the face of a beauty queen, Lai Ti Kio Trang. The story begins in the coastal city of Tai Bin, a generally peaceful region. At the Tai Bin Lung Hospital, doctors and nurses worked day and night to save lives. Among them was Mrs. Dthy, a dedicated nurse. Mrs. Y led a seemingly perfect life, a happy family, a successful husband, and obedient children. She had a very close younger cousin named Lai Ti Kio Trang, born in 1994. Trang was young, stylish, and frequently visited Mrs. Y's home to hang out and share meals. In everyone's eyes, Trang was a polite, well-behaved little sister. But no one, not even Mrs. Y, could have guessed that behind that friendly smile, Trang was harboring a sinful secret and a brutal plan aimed directly at her cousin's life. The tragedy stemmed from a twisted relationship, a moral incest. Lai Ti Kio Trang had fallen in love and entered into a clandestine affair with her own brother-in-law, Mrs. Y's husband. This shadowy relationship lasted for nearly a year. Trang, with the impulsiveness and selfishness of youth, drowned herself in this forbidden affection. She grew jealous of her own cousin, consumed by a desire to possess her sister's husband entirely. But around October 2019, the brother-in-law, perhaps struck by a conscience or fearing the destruction of his family, decided to end this illicit affair and return to his wife and children. For a normal person, ending a wrongful relationship is a chance to start over. But for Lai Ti Kio Trang, it was an apocalypse. Jealousy and hatred clouded the reason of the 25-year-old. Trang could not accept being abandoned. She convinced herself that Mrs. Y's existence was the only barrier standing between her and her lover. In the young girl's mind, a mad and brutal thought took root: if her cousin died, the brother-in-law would belong to her forever. From that thought, Trang began to plot a murder. The terrifying aspect of Lai Ti Kio Trang lies in her method. She did not choose direct violence. She chose poison. Trang went online, searched for, and ordered sodium cyanide, one of the deadliest substances on Earth. A tiny amount, the size of a grain of rice, is enough to kill a healthy adult in an instant. The fact that buying such a lethal chemical was so easy on social media indirectly fueled Trang's crime. Once she had the cyanide, Trang calculated how to introduce it into the victim's body. She knew her cousin loved bubble tea. On December 2, 2019, Trang bought 6 cups of bubble tea. Using a syringe, she carefully injected the liquid cyanide into 4 of the 6 cups. Why 4? Perhaps she wanted to ensure the highest probability of death, or perhaps it was simply random cruelty. To camouflage this gift of death, Trang also bought a bag of mandarin oranges and enclosed an envelope containing 100,000 VND, pretending to be a patient's family member sending a thank you gift to the doctors and nurses at the Internal Medicine Department No. 3, where Mrs. Y worked. Trang hired a shipper to deliver the bag to the hospital. When the shipper called, Mrs. Y was not at the department, so she asked a colleague to receive it on her behalf. The bag of tea and fruit was placed in the department's administrative room. Mrs. Y and her colleagues had absolutely no idea that sitting among those sweet cups of milk tea were potent doses of poison, waiting to take the life of anyone who took a sip. Cruel fate began to turn its wheel from that moment. In the break room, the medical staff drank 2 of the cups. Luckily, those were the 2 unpoisoned ones. The remaining cups were put into the refrigerator. Mrs. Y, the intended target, was busy with work and hadn't yet touched them, unknowingly escaping death. But the Grim Reaper would not leave empty-handed. He turned his scythe toward a completely innocent victim. On the morning of December 3, 2019, Mrs. N.H., a 29-year-old nurse known for her gentleness and dedication, arrived at work. Seeing the bubble tea in the fridge, she took a cup to drink. She had no way of knowing it was one of the cups Trang had filled with cyanide. After taking just a few sips, Mrs. H. tasted something strange and ran to the bathroom to spit it out. But cyanide acts with terrifying speed on the nervous and cardiovascular systems. Immediately, Mrs. H. collapsed on the floor, seized by convulsions, and died within mere minutes. Her sudden death shocked the entire hospital. A young, healthy woman had dropped dead instantly at her workplace. Initially, Mrs. H.'s death was attributed to a stroke or sudden cardiac arrest. Her family, overwhelmed by grief and not wanting to subject her body to an autopsy, took her home for burial. It seemed Lai Kyo Trang's crime had succeeded perfectly and would be buried forever in the grave of the unfortunate nurse. Mrs. Y was still alive, and Trang remained free, perhaps plotting her next move. However, the net of heaven is vast, though its mesh is wide, nothing escapes. A few anomalous details caught the attention of the Tai Bin provincial police. Why would a healthy young person like Mrs. H die suddenly right after drinking tea? Whispers circulated in the hospital, and suspicions about the origin of those unclaimed cups of tea urged investigators to intervene. Connecting the dots, the anonymous gift bag, the complex family relationships of Mrs. Y, and the sudden death, the police decided to exhume Mrs. H's body for an autopsy. The forensic results were a bombshell. Cyanide was found in Mrs. H's internal organs. This was not a natural death. This was a homicide. This was poisoning. Following the trail of the burner SIM card used to call the shipper and the movement logs, the police quickly closed in and arrested Lai Kyo Trang. At the police station, the beautiful, youthful face of Lai Kyo Trang stood in stark contrast to the coldness of her testimony. She admitted to everything. Trang stated that her original goal was solely to kill her cousin to claim her brother-in-law. She did not know Mrs. H, and the nurse's death was unintended, but the phrase unintended cannot justify the brutality. When Trang injected poison into 4 cups of tea and sent them to a crowded place like a hospital, she accepted the possibility of mass casualties. That act demonstrated a total disregard for human life, a form of murder by a method capable of killing many people. The case caused public outrage not only because of the sophisticated method but because of the moral degradation it represented. A young, educated girl was willing to kill her close cousin over a blind, incestuous affair. She was willing to turn innocent bystanders into collateral damage for her jealousy. The image of Nurse H's elderly mother, her young husband, and her small children weeping over her portrait left the public in tears and fury. The trial of Lai Kyo Trang took place in a tense atmosphere. Standing in the dock, Trang kept her head down, mumbling her testimony. But her belated tears could not wash away her sins. Her actions were judged as cowardly, cruel, and devoid of humanity. The People's Court of Tai Bin Province sentenced Lai Kyo Trang to the highest penalty, death. The case of Lai Kyo Trang stands at number 6 because it is a stark warning about the dangers of toxic relationships in modern society. It reveals just how fragile the line is between a stylish, hot girl, and a cold-blooded killer when reason is blinded by lust. It is also an alarm bell regarding the loose regulation of toxic chemicals in cyberspace. The cup of bubble tea, a symbol of sweetness and joy, was transformed by Trang's hands into a haunting cup of death. Nurse H. is gone forever, an unjust death in place of another, leaving behind an unceasing pain for her family and a sad scar on the medical community of Tai Bin. This story reminds us that sometimes, danger does not come from an enemy, but from the base desires hidden deep within the human heart. Number 7, Dr. Nguyen Man Tuong, When the White Coat Becomes a Shroud. If the poisoned bubble tea case preyed on our fear of intimate betrayal, the seventh entry on our list strikes at a much deeper societal fear, the terror of when angels in white coats transform into demons. We entrust our lives to doctors with absolute faith, believing they are sworn to save us. But in 2013, that faith was shattered by a cataclysmic event, where a renowned surgeon, instead of saving a life, chose to cast his patient's body into a freezing river to protect his reputation. This is the dossier of the Cat Tuong aesthetic salon case. We return to Hanoi in the autumn of 2013. It was a time when the demand for beauty and cosmetic surgery began to explode as a fashionable trend. Aesthetic clinics sprang up like mushrooms after the rain, and prominent among them was the Cat Tuong aesthetic salon located on Jai Phong Road. Its owner was Master Dr. Nguyen Man Tuong. Tuong was not a nameless quack. He possessed a perfect resume, a surgeon at Bok Mai Hospital, one of the country's leading medical institutions, properly trained, highly skilled, and regarded by colleagues as having golden hands. It was this badge of prestige that led Ms. Lo Thi Ton Huynh, a 39-year-old woman, to trust him with her life for a breast augmentation surgery, hoping to become more beautiful in the eyes of her husband and children. But Ms. Huynh never knew that October 19, 2013, would be the last day she saw the sun. That morning, she arrived at the Cat Tuong salon. The liposuction and breast augmentation were performed right there at the private facility, even though regulation strictly mandated that such major surgeries be conducted only in hospitals equipped with full emergency capabilities. Nguyen Man Tuong's complacency and greed had sown the seeds of tragedy. After the surgery, which lasted several hours, Ms. Huynh began to show alarming symptoms. She went into convulsions, foamed at the mouth, and struggled to breathe. At this moment, the true nature of Nguyen Man Tuong was put to the test. As a veteran emergency doctor, his first reflex should have been to transfer the patient to Bok Mai Hospital, where he worked, or call 115 for an ambulance. It would have taken only minutes for help to arrive. Her chance of survival was likely still there. But no. Tuong chose to handle it internally. He administered anti-seizure medication, put her on oxygen, and hoped everything would be fine. He feared that if he called for help, his illegal surgery operation would be exposed, his reputation ruined, and his salon shut down. He placed his career above a human life. At 5:45 p.m. that same day, Ms. Huynh died. The death of a patient right in a private clinic marks the end of any doctor's career. Faced with the cold body of the unfortunate woman, Nguyen Man Tuong stood at a crossroads. One path was to surrender, accepting the loss of everything to salvage a shred of conscience. The other was to dispose of the body, gambling with the devil to cover up the crime. He chose the second path. This decision transformed a medical malpractice incident, which might have resulted only in administrative penalties or a short prison term, into a gruesome criminal case that would outrage the public for years. Tuong ordered his staff to clear the scene, seal the books, and remove the security camera hard drives to destroy evidence. But the most terrifying part was the plan to dispose of the body. He did not do this alone. He dragged Dao Quang Khan, a security guard who was only 17 years old, into the crime. That night, Hanoi was chilly. Nguyen Man Tuong drove his personal car, carrying Ms. Huynh's body, while Dao Quang Khan followed behind on the victim's motorbike. They drove in circles through various streets to throw off any potential witnesses. Initially, Tuong planned to take the body to Ton Tri Bridge, but seeing too many people, he changed direction. The hesitation and calculation while driving with a corpse in the car revealed a nerve so steady it was frightening. Finally, they stopped at Ton Tri Bridge, heading toward National Highway 5. It was around midnight. The Red River flowed turbulently below, ink black in the darkness. Tuong and Khan lifted Ms. Huin's body out of the car. With no prayer, no hesitation, they heaved the woman over the railing. The sound of the heavy object hitting the water was swallowed by the wind and the noise of late-night traffic. In an instant, Ms. Huin vanished into the cold currents, taking her unspoken grievances with her. After disposing of the body, Tuong returned to his normal life as if nothing had happened. Khan took Ms. Huin's motorbike and abandoned it elsewhere to stage a fake scene, suggesting she had gone missing or been robbed. The cruelty of Tuong was further illuminated by a chilling detail: his wife knew. She had even followed her husband's car on that fateful night, attempting to dissuade him, but not forcefully enough, and ultimately, she chose silence to protect him. The wife's silence was another knife twisting in the pain of the victim's family. The case broke open when Ms. Huin's family, unable to contact her, reported her missing to the police. From the abandoned motorbike and clues found at the salon, though wiped, traces remained. The police summoned Nguyen Man Tuong. Faced with sharp evidence, the dignified doctor had to bow his head and confess. His admission of throwing the body into the Red River delivered a massive psychological shock to society. People could not believe that a doctor trained to save lives could commit an act as savage as a gangster. However, the tragedy of the Cat Tuong case did not end with the confession. It opened a new, more painful and enduring chapter: the hopeless search for the body. Based on Tuong's testimony, hundreds of police officers, divers, and even psychics were mobilized to search for Ms. Huin in the Red River. The victim's family spent billions of dong, hiring divers to grope through every meter of water, scanning dozens of kilometers along the riverbanks. They burned incense, set up altars, and tried every spiritual and scientific method available. But the Red River remained silent. 1 month, 2 months, then half a year passed. No body. The mysterious disappearance of Ms. Huin's corpse spawned countless conspiracy theories. The public began to doubt: was Tuong telling the truth? Or had he disposed of the body in a more horrific way, perhaps dismembering it or using chemicals? The pressure of public opinion weighed heavily on the investigation agency. Without a body, proving a charge of murder would be incredibly difficult. At times, the case seemed to hit a dead end. It wasn't until July 2014, nearly 9 months after that fateful night, that a fisherman discovered a body floating near the Van Duc Ferry Terminal, Gia Lam, Hanoi, several kilometers downstream from Ton Tri Bridge. The body was in a state of advanced decomposition, no longer intact, missing the head, hands, and feet due to long exposure to the water. But thanks to DNA testing, authorities confirmed it was indeed Ms. Lo Thi Ton Huin. Finally, after 9 cold months at the bottom of the river, she was returned to her family, though her body was not whole. Rumors that the body had been encased in concrete proved false. It was natural decomposition, but the pain and the haunting nature of the discovery were incomparable. The trial of Nguyen Man Tuong attracted unprecedented attention. He was prosecuted for violating regulations on medical examination and treatment, and infringing upon a corpse. What outraged many was that Tuong was not charged with murder, because investigators could not prove whether Ms. Huin died before or after being thrown into the river due to the state of the body. Nevertheless, the sentence of 19 years in prison was the price Tuong paid for his conscience and career. Dao Quang Khan received 33 months in prison. The case of Nguyen Man Tuong stands at number 7 because it is an indelible stain on the medical profession. It destroyed society's trust in medical ethics. The image of Dr. Tuong standing on Ton Tri Bridge, casting his patient into the river, became a symbol of moral decay. It reminds us that fame and money can transform a person trained to heal into the cruelest of killers. The Red River flows on, but the story of the Cat Tuong aesthetic salon will forever remain a cold warning to those who don the white coat but forget the Hippocratic Oath. Number 8, The Chicken Delivery Girl and the Nightmare on New Year's Eve. We leave behind the glittering metropolises and medical scandals to journey up into the remote northwestern mountains, to the historic province of Dien Bien. During the Lunar New Year of 2019, while the entire nation was joyously preparing to welcome the Year of the Pig, with families gathering around traditional feasts, in a corner of the Muang Ton market, a young girl was diligently helping her mother sell goods. That girl was Chow Mai Duyen, born in 1997, a university student who had returned home for the holidays. She was beautiful, gentle, and filial. The image of the young student nimbly catching chickens for customers amidst the biting cold of the highlands would be the final snapshot of peace before the storm descended. This case stands at number 8 because it marks the rise of collective evil. This was not the work of a lone wolf, but of a pack of demons. They were long-time drug addicts, men living on the fringes of society, who conspired to turn an innocent girl into a sacrificial lamb for dark debts and base desires. Around 6 p.m. on February 4, 2019, the afternoon of the 30th of Tet, New Year's Eve, a stranger approached the stall asking to buy a large number of chickens. He asked for Duyen's phone number and later called to place an order for 10 chickens, requesting delivery to the C13 area in Ton Truong Ward. Duyen, with her innocence and eager to help her mother sell out early so they could go home to celebrate, happily agreed. The petite girl strapped the cage of chickens to the back of her motorbike and rode off into the twilight mist. She had no idea that the phone call was her death knell, and the road ahead was a one-way journey. At the rendezvous point, Duyen did not find a customer. She found predators lying in wait. Vong Van Hung, Bui Van Song, and their accomplices ambushed her. They subdued her, using nunchaku to choke her until she fainted, then kidnapped her and threw her into the back of Bui Van Song's truck. What transpired over the next 3 days, from New Year's Eve to the third day of Tet, was a sequence of barbaric acts that defy human imagination. Duyen was not killed immediately. She was held captive at Bui Van Song's house. There, she became a sexual slave for the entire group. One after another, these filthy, drug-addled men took turns raping the young girl while she was bound, physically exhausted, and in a state of absolute terror. The true cruelty of this criminal ring lay in their nonchalance, while Duyen's family was frantically searching every corner of the province in despair, and while fireworks exploded in the sky to herald the new year, inside Bui Van Song's house, the killers calmly ate, drank, wished each other a happy new year, and used drugs, treating the dying girl in the back room as nothing more than a toy. Even Bui Van Song's wife, Bui T. Kim Thursday, knew exactly what was happening. She witnessed the girl being tormented in her own home, yet she did not intervene or call the police. Instead, she became complicit, pretending she saw nothing, abetting the evil running rampant under her own roof. By February 6, the second day of Tet, seeing that Duyen had become too weak, the group discussed their next move. Some suggested taking her to the emergency room, but Six Van Ton, the mastermind, and Bui Van Song shot it down. They feared exposure. They decided on the cruelest option, kill her to silence her. Late that night, they carried Duyen to a nearby abandoned house. There, they took turns strangling the girl until she died. After Duyen took her last breath, they colluded to unify their alibis, erased traces, washed the victim's clothes, and staged a fake crime scene to mislead investigators. Bui T. Kim Thursday even played the role of a witness, pretending to accidentally discover the body on the morning of the third day of Tet and raising the alarm, all to create an alibi for her husband and his gang. When Chow Mai Duyen's body was found in the abandoned house, semi-naked and wearing only a motorcycle helmet, public fury across the nation reached a boiling point. But investigating this case was incredibly difficult. The suspects were all hardened drug addicts with extensive criminal records, and they had carefully rehearsed their stories. They confessed in drips and drabs, lied, and blamed each other, forcing the special task force to engage in a grueling battle of wits. But every crime must eventually be brought to light. Through sharp investigative measures and forensic evidence, one by one, they were forced to bow their heads and confess. And from here, another heartbreaking truth was revealed: the motive for the kidnapping. The root of the tragedy was not merely random lust. It stemmed from a drug debt dating back years between the victim's mother, Mrs. Tran Thi Hien, and the drug lord Six Van Ton. Ton testified that Mrs. Hien owed him money from heroin deals but refused to pay. He hired Bui Van Song's gang to kidnap Duyen to pressure Mrs. Hien into paying the debt. This detail transformed the case from a brutal rape murder into a tragedy of the underworld, where the sins of the previous generation dealt a fatal blow to the next. The young Chow Mai Duyan paid with her life and dignity for her mother's mistakes. The Dien Bien chicken delivery girl case leaves a lingering horror about the degradation of humanity. A group of 9 people, including Bui T. Kim Thursday, participated in this crime in various forms. They represented the absolute bottom of social morality, addicted, lazy, cruel, and emotionless. The trial took place right in the Dien Bien Phu Stadium, witnessed by thousands of local citizens. The harshest verdicts were handed down: 6 death sentences for 6 Van Ton, Bui Van Song, Vong Van Hung, and the key accomplices for murder, rape, and kidnapping. This remains one of the cases with the highest number of death penalties in the history of Vietnamese litigation for a single crime. Chow Mai Duyan is gone, but the image of the gentle student on that New Year's Eve remains a painful scar on the Northwest Mountains. This 8th case is a fierce warning about the drug peril in the border regions, and the devastation the White Death wreaks on human character. It reminds us that when humans allow drugs and depravity to lead the way, they can conspire to create a living hell right in the midst of the most beautiful days of spring. Number 9, Dang Van Hung, The Rage of the Primordial Forest. If the chicken delivery girl case in Dien Bien was a haunting nightmare of collective evil and the degradation of humanity caused by drugs, the case standing at number 9 takes us even deeper into the impenetrable, ancient forests of the Northwest Mountains. Here, the laws of civilization sometimes fade, yielding to the law of the jungle, where human life can suddenly become cheaper than the grass and trees that surround it. This is the story of a horrific massacre that took place in Van Yen District, Yen by province, in the autumn of 2015. There was no sophisticated plot, no complex web of romantic intrigue. This case is the starkest, most brutal evidence that when ignorance meets primal instinct, a petty dispute over a few inches of soil can lead to the annihilation of an entire bloodline. The killer's name is Dang Van Hung. To understand the context of this tragedy, we must visualize Kai Village in Lam Jong Commune. It is a land tucked deep within the mountains, isolated from the outside world, where people survive primarily by slash-and-burn farming. Life here is hard, laborious, but generally peaceful. Dang Van Hung, born in 1989, known locally as Hung Man, grew up like a wild weed in the forest. He was uneducated, sullen, and notorious in the region as a reckless bully who always carried a knife and was ready to resolve any conflict with violence. In Hung's narrow worldview, muscle power and the cold edge of a blade were the only truths. The conflict that ignited this massacre stemmed from a reason that sounds heartbreakingly trivial to the modern ear: a dispute over a water source and farming land. The family of Mr. Tran Van Long and Dang Van Hung had plots of land right next to each other. During the cultivation process, friction arose regarding the stream used for irrigation and the exact boundary line between their fields. To a city dweller, this is a civil matter to be resolved through mediation or a lawsuit. But deep in the forest, under the scorching sun of August, inside the heated head of a thug, it became the trigger for a devastating bomb. On the afternoon of August 12, 2015, Dang Van Hung went up to the fields and encountered Mr. Long and his wife, Mrs. Hoa, weeding their plot. Words were exchanged, and the old conflict flared up. Hung lost his temper. He kicked Mrs. Hoa in the head, then turned to attack Mr. Long. When Mr. Long tried to run, Hung's killer instinct took over. He didn't stop at a fistfight to vent his anger. He drew the razor-sharp Mio knife hanging at his hip, a traditional Hmong knife used for clearing thick brush, and transformed it into a weapon of mass slaughter. Hung chased Mr. Long down and slashed him, felling the victim right by the stream. Hung's cruelty was demonstrated in the absolute decisiveness of his actions. He offered his victim no chance of survival. After killing Mr. Long, Hung turned back to find Mrs. Hoa. The frail woman, unarmed and terrified, begged for her life, but Hung did not feel a flicker of mercy. He swung the knife again, claiming a second life. If the crime had stopped there, perhaps Dang Van Hung would not be classified as a demon. What makes this case truly haunting is what happened next. After killing the couple, Hung walked toward the family's field hut. There, he encountered Mrs. Hoa's younger sister. Fearing she would expose his crime, he slaughtered her without hesitation. And then, his eyes fell upon little Phan Van Tuen, the son of Mr. Long and Mrs. Hoa. The boy was only 2 years old, standing bewildered in the hut, too young to comprehend the horror unfolding around him. An innocent child who knew nothing of land disputes or hatred. Faced with such a child, even the most hardened criminals might hesitate. But not Dang Van Hung. In a blood-drunk haze, fueled by a cold, peasant logic that one must pull the weeds up by the roots to prevent future revenge, he heartlessly took the toddler's life. For lives from one family. For bodies scattered across the cold, desolate forest floor. All for a trickle of water. All for a moment of rage. After committing this earth-shattering massacre, Dang Van Hung returned home, as calm as if nothing had happened. He found his lover, Nguyen Thi Han, alias Hong, a woman 10 years his senior, and told her to flee with him. He said to her simply, "I just killed the whole family. We have to run." Ms. Han, partly out of fear of Hung's violence and partly out of ignorance, agreed to go with him. The two plunged into the deep jungle, beginning a desperate flight from the law. News of the quadruple homicide in Yen Bai spread like wildfire, shaking the entire nation. The terrain of Yen Bai is treacherous, a landscape of endless, layered mountains, making it the perfect hideout for a man who knew the woods like the back of his hand. The Ministry of Public Security and the Yen Bai provincial police mobilized hundreds of officers. They set up checkpoints on every road, blockaded the border, fearing he would escape to China, and deployed troops into the forest to hunt him down. The manhunt for Dang Van Hung was likened to a small-scale military operation in peacetime. During their days on the run, Hung and his lover lived like primitives. They ate banana flowers to stave off hunger, drank water from streams, slept in the bush, and moved constantly to evade the tracking dogs. Hung always kept a homemade flintlock pistol and the murder weapon by his side, ready to fight to the death if discovered. Hung's stubbornness and survival skills made the pursuit incredibly difficult. At times, his tracks would be found, only to vanish again as the forest rains washed everything away. However, the net of heaven is vast. After 3 days and nights of intense pursuit, on the morning of August 15, 2015, scouts captured Dang Van Hung and his lover while they were hiding in a forest in Con Hoa Commune, Luc Yen District, quite far from the crime scene. When caught, Hung showed absolutely no fear or remorse. He casually admitted to his actions, recounting every detail with an attitude so cold it bordered on apathy. He stated that he killed the couple because he was annoyed, and he killed the toddler because it cried too loud, and he feared it would grow up to take revenge. That barbaric mindset sent a chill through anyone who heard it, revealing the utter darkness in this killer's soul. The trial of Dang Van Hung was held as a mobile court right in the center of Van Yen District, attracting thousands of people who poured in from remote villages to watch. Standing in the dock, Hung maintained his sullen, defiant expression. He did not ask for leniency. It seemed he knew exactly the price he had to pay for 4 human lives. The People's Court of Yen Bai Province sentenced Dang Van Hung to the highest penalty, death. His lover, Ms. Nguyen Thi Han, was determined to have been coerced into fleeing and did not participate in the murders, so she was exempted from criminal liability for harboring a criminal but faced administrative penalties. The case of Dang Van Hung stands at number 9 on this list because it represents a different shadow of Vietnamese crime, the crime of the remote hinterlands. It is a painful alarm bell about the lack of legal education and the persistence of savage, impulsive behavior in certain segments of the population. It shows that where the light of civilization has not fully illuminated the hidden corners of the soul, humans can easily revert to animalistic instincts, resolving conflicts with blood and tears. The forests of Yen Bai have grown green again, and the stream where the murders took place still trickles over the rocks, but the pain of a family wiped out, especially the bewildered eyes of a 2-year-old child facing a knife, will remain an indelible scar in the memories of those left behind. Dang Van Hung has paid for his crimes, but the question of how to bring education and the rule of law to the farthest villages to prevent such tragedies remains a stinging question without a complete answer. Here is the epic, slow-burn deep-dive script for number 10, Le Quoc Tuan, Tuan, the monkey, followed by the grand conclusion for the entire series. This script is designed to bring your top 10 list to a thunderous, cinematic close, maintaining the high-quality documentary tone found in the previous entries. Number 10, Tuan, the monkey, and the AK-47 gunshots that tore through the night of Siu Chi. To close this list, we do not choose a case of silent poisoning or hidden bodies, but a tragedy that unfolded with the violence of a Hollywood action movie, yet soaked in the very real blood of reality. This is the only case on our list that involves the deafening roar of military-grade gunfire, the mobilization of armored vehicles, and a manhunt involving hundreds of police officers. And the killer was not a gangster from the start, but a corrupt officer of the law. It is a red alert warning about the scourge of gambling during the Lunar New Year and the extreme danger that arises when the beast inside a man armed with a weapon is awakened. Our journey ends in Siu Chi, the legendary Iron Land of Ho Chi Minh City. This region was once a fierce battlefield during the war, but in 2020, it became the stage for a different kind of horror in peacetime. During the Year of the Rat, while the echoes of spring festivities still lingered on the yellow apricot blossoms, and families were still immersed in holiday reunions, a tragedy struck. On the afternoon of January 29, 2020, the fifth day of Tet, a volley of sharp, decisive AK-47 gunshots rang out from a gambling den hidden deep within a longan orchard in Tan Ton Dong commune. Those shots did not just claim the lives of 5 people, they triggered the largest criminal manhunt in the modern history of Ho Chi Minh City Police. The shooter was Le Quoc Tuan, known in the underworld by the nickname, Tuan, the monkey. Le Quoc Tuan was no ordinary criminal. He was a senior lieutenant in the police force, serving at the detention center of District 11. He was formally trained, proficient in the use of various weapons, and was once considered a sharpshooter. In the eyes of his colleagues and neighbors, Tuan was agile, social, and well-liked. But behind the uniform, Tuan was a heavy gambling addict. The duality between his role as an enforcer of the law and the gambling demon raging inside him was the fuse for this catastrophe. On that fateful afternoon of the 5th day of Tet, Tuan and his cousin rode a motorbike to the gambling ring in the Longan Orchard to play Tai Shio, Sick Bo. This was an illegal, makeshift casino, but it attracted many high-stakes gamblers from the region. With the red and black fever boiling in his blood, Tuan dove into the game, but luck did not smile upon him. In a short time, he lost everything he had. Frustrated and desperate, Tuan asked the house to let him pawn his motorcycle to try and win back his losses, but they refused. Mocked and chased away by the other gamblers, the wounded pride of a man with an ego, combined with the crushing pressure of debt, turned Tuan into a ticking time bomb. Tuan left, but not to go home and reflect. He went home to get his tools. He returned to the gambling den with a folding stock AK-47 rifle hidden under his jacket. Without a word, without a warning, Tuan coldly unleashed a hail of bullets into the crowd of gamblers. The superior marksmanship skills of a police lieutenant were now used to slaughter his fellow men. The shots were precise and devastating. 4 men dropped dead on the spot, their blood staining the gambling mats and the roots of the old longan trees. Another was critically injured. In his bloodlust, Tuan even shot dead a dairy cow belonging to a nearby household. The scene was absolute chaos, screams of terror mixed with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Tuan calmly stepped over the bodies, snatched approximately 1 billion VND from the mats, and fled on a motorcycle. But the nightmare did not end in the orchard. On his escape route, the demon inside Tuan took complete control. He became more reckless and savage than ever. He blocked a woman's motorbike to carjack her, but she managed to jump into a ditch and escape, surviving a grazing bullet. By the early hours of the next morning, on Provincial Road 15, Tuan spotted a man named Mr. V riding a wave scooter. No warning shots, no threats, Tuan fired directly at Mr. V, killing him instantly to steal the bike. This act proved that Tuan had burned all bridges. He was ready to kill anyone who stood in his way, or simply anyone who could aid his escape. The rampage of Tuan, the monkey, killing 5 people, 4 at the gambling den, 1 on the road, sent a shockwave of terror through the region. Ho Chi Minh City and neighboring provinces like Binh Duong and Tay Ninh lived in fear. Citizens locked their doors and bolted their windows, daring not to venture out at night. The image of a killer with tactical skills, armed with an AK-47 and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, lurking somewhere in the vast rubber plantations or abandoned houses, was an unprecedented security threat. The Ministry of Public Security intervened. Over 500 elite officers from the mobile police and criminal investigation units, supported by armored vehicles, service dogs, and drones, were mobilized to encircle Tuan's suspected hideout in Trung An Commune. Siu Chi, the Melaleuca and rubber forests were combed meter by meter. The siege lasted for days and nights of extreme tension. Millions of people watched the news, holding their breath, waiting for the outcome. However, Tuan, the monkey, with his cunning and intimate knowledge of the terrain, managed to slip through the initial cordon and escape to Hoc Mon. He hid in a desolate abandoned house near a riverbank, aided and supplied by a few acquaintances, who were later arrested and imprisoned for harboring a criminal. On February 13, 2020, after 15 days and nights of an intense manhunt, scouts pinpointed Tuan's exact location. Special forces secretly surrounded the house. The order was clear: call for surrender, but if the subject resists, eliminate him immediately to ensure the safety of the force and the public. That night, the sound of a loudspeaker calling for surrender pierced the silence of the Hoc Mon countryside. But the response to the authorities' goodwill was the sound of a chamber being racked and fierce return fire from within the house. Tuan, the monkey, chose death over justice. He knew his crimes were unforgivable. A volley of return fire from the special police forces ended the life of Lo Quoc Tuan. He collapsed beside his AK-47, which was still loaded, closing the chapter on 15 days of terror. The case of Lo Quoc Tuan stands at number 10, concluding this list, as the starkest and most violent warning. It is not just a story about murder. It is a tragedy of gambling. It was the demon of chance that transformed a lieutenant with a bright future into a cold-blooded killer hunted by society. It shows that when a human being loses their reason to the frenzy of high-stakes gambling, the line between good and evil can be erased in a split second. The sound of the AK-47 in Siu Chi has faded, but its echo remains, reminding us that humanity's greatest enemy is not someone else, but our own uncontrollable desires.